Warning, the following program is extremely janky. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, 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 and welcome back to the only podcast with...
Warning, rate limit exceeded, rate limit exceeded, rate limit exceeded.
Citation needed. I'm your host, Troy.
And I'm Aaron.
And we're back. Thanks for rejoining us. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. How you been, man?
I've been pretty well. It's been another week.
Yeah? Yeah, that's one way of putting it.
Maybe not as exciting as last week in terms of the happenings in the world.
Yeah, not quite. No catastrophic implosions. At least none that were worthy of being reported on.
Yeah. Other than maybe what's going on in the streets of Paris, but...
Yeah, true. Or the way that Twitter's being handled. I guess you could probably classify that as a catastrophic implosion. Yeah. Depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
with one billionaire in particular specifically culpable.
Yeah, true. Instead of a whole submarine full of them. Maybe I'm not up to date, or I'm sure somebody listening isn't as up to date. What's going on in France?
Well, I guess it must have been less than a week now. His name was Nahel. He was a young man, 17 years old, North African, I believe, an Arab. And he was killed by police. They initially claimed that he had been trying to run them over or something like that, but then they reviewed the video evidence and that turned out to be a lie. And yeah, so France has been rocked by protests and they've escalated pretty heavily. So now, you know, we see the deployment of riot police across the country. I mean, this isn't limited to Paris and the suburbs of Paris, but it's across the country. And yeah, it's quite an alarming situation for a number of reasons. So
I saw this weird quote. I can't remember exactly how it went, but it was the guy Macron, the prime minister, and he said something like, it was something along the lines of like, "Oh, the youths are on the streets imitating their video games that they're so in love with," or something like that.
Intoxicated.
Yeah. It was like,
yeah, a widely planned statement.
It's like, what are you saying, dude? Like, what does this even mean? Like.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I feel that there is a point embedded in there that could be sussed out, more in regards to social media and the emergence of like amplified grievance and anger and sort of a mob mentality online. Because as I'm kind of a mixed feeling in regards to the protests and the rioting. I mean, the protests are necessary, and what happened to this young man was a crime. I believe that the officer's been charged for, but that speaks to a systemic issue in terms of the use of force in France and the racialized use of force in France. But it's been seized upon by opportunists to engage in widespread violence, looting. I mean, there was the desecration of a Holocaust memorial. Yeah, so people chanting "Death to the Jews" in the streets and stuff like that.
What?
So, and this doesn't speak to all of it, but that's a segment of it, right? And so I think it's important for us to suss out the fact that on one hand these represent, you know, many real grievances, and that there's a core element that needs to really be addressed. But at the same time, these sorts of things get seized upon and justified, and we see hatred and reactionary things get laundered in. So it's a balance of those two things.
Yeah, I feel like, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure that I would agree with what you're saying, but I feel like it's just so, it does come off as very, very out of touch. Like the statement about,
oh yes,
like video games, where it's like, okay, first of all, what video game is this? Like, what video game are people like where's the violent looting Simulator 2023? Like, I haven't played that one. I don't know. I haven't seen the Steam reviews for that. Like, is he implying just generally that like violence existing in video games implies violence is okay in real life? Like, what is? Well,
never mind. I mean, the idea. I mean, what video game did they play in 1790 when they went to the streets and killed Marie Antoinette? Right. Yeah, so I think the French have been doing this a lot longer than there's been video games.
True.
You know, going back to that point, I'd kind of glossed over that and the absurdity of it. Like I said, I do think that there's a point in regards to the amplified grievance and the amplified reactionary politics from many directions that exist because of social media. And I think that actually Macron is, although a bad messenger for it and completely out of touch, he is touching on something that's important, and I don't think that should be entirely lost. The other thing, though, like, you know, the other side of that is that Macron really represents a very particular governance style, this sort of technocratic and highly alienated sort of governance style.
What does that mean?
Technocracy, and it's widely misused phrase. So I use it very sparingly, but in this case, you know, it's rule by experts is usually the idea to think about it, right? Technical experts in different fields. He himself, I believe, is a economist by trade.
Okay.
And was, you know, a banker. And so my point is that there's experts who are alienated from the real social conditions, and are basing policies and on sort of these abstruse sort of theoretical notions of how the world work, rather than being connected to it on the street. So you get completely out of touch statements, and it speaks to this broader disconnect between bureaucracy and the population that feeds into those grievances.
Yeah.
Like he exemplifies in a lot of ways the problems with the French state that also lead to the death of young men like Nahel.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's hard for me. Like you say, there's a grain of truth in what he's saying, like a real issue to touch on. It's so tricky for me to pull that nugget of truth out of a statement that is so blatantly out of touch. You know, it's like the whole like red pill thing, you know, where it's like Andrew Tate says some like really out of pocket stuff, and then every like 10th sentence he's like oh, but you should you know, you should probably eat healthier. It's like oh. It's like that Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the TV meme, like, oh, he said something. He said something good. So it's like to hear Macron say this stuff but it's like on the one hand he's like criticizing social media and stuff, which I think is totally valid. Like social media that's a whole can of worms.
It's a feeding frenzy.
Yeah, but the video games cause violence thing is so played out. It's so played out. Like I cannot believe we're even still having this conversation.
Well, yeah, we grew up thinking. Sorry, please.
Oh, it's like the Dungeons and Dragons Satanism thing. It's just like this satanic panic that just changes every 10 years with the times, like with the technology, with whatever's available. It's like, oh, now it's video games, now it's streamers, now it's just like so tired.
It really speaks to something that I think you and I both appreciate from our childhood. Those moral panics that would happen around the release of GTA 3 and especially Vice City and San Andreas when these games, because GTA 3 wasn't like, it was the first really big one, so there wasn't as much like concern in the lead up. But once that came out and Vice City was on the verge, like there was this huge media frenzy, and I'm sure that there were, you know, committees on it and stuff like that.
The crazy thing around San Andreas was the hot coffee thing. Remember that? There was like this code that I guess they left in that they weren't supposed to leave in that was effectively like a sex mini game. And the early 2000s equivalent of data miners basically were able to like reactivate this dormant code. And this was on platforms where internet patching was not a thing. Or I don't know that it wasn't a thing. It just wasn't commonplace. Like I think on the original Xbox, there were a few games near the end of the life cycle where they were starting to take advantage of like being able to patch the game through the internet. But I think the vast majority of games, you got it and that was it. Like it was how it was on the disc, and that was like pretty much it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I remember that was crazy in the news. Like I didn't watch news when I was that age, but like. It was just like, it would just be all over the place. Yeah, that was wild. It was some wild stuff. But yeah, it does definitely feel like it's the same kind of out of touch moral panic type thing sometimes. And a situation like this is tricky because you're right. There is a very real substance of something that is worth talking about that's like intertwined with all these weird, vague pearl clutching kind of.
Well, and part of it too, it speaks to the fact that he doesn't even though he is touching on something, this might sound a little bit contradictory and strange, but I swear it makes sense. He's both touching on something that is true, but doesn't understand what the hell he's talking about or that he's really touching upon it, right? And he's confusing video games with social media, with its kind of this melange of this generalized anxiety around technology and its social impacts.
Yeah.
But within that, there is a conversation to be had, right? I mean, I would argue that there is a conversation to be had around the publishing of video games and like, you know, not to the pearl clutching extent, but I think that that's a worthy conversation to be had.
Yeah.
Even though I do tend to be against any form of censorship, it's still any art that's put into the world, and video games constitute a form of art. There should be critique of, right? And some things are art, and some things are, for lack of a better term, pornography. Right. And so I think that there's something to be said about saying, I mean, again, like, I'm not saying ban pornography, but like, there's a difference between, do you know what I mean when I make that distinction, when I'm calling things generally pornography? Rather than,
you mean like conceptually, like it's not literally.
Yeah, it's not literally sexually graphic pornography. It's pornography of violence or pornography of some other sort of, it's base. It's
like
not
hedonistic almost.
Hedonistic. Yeah. It's not rooted in, there's not really a thinking premise to it. There's simply a feeling. It's just about base atavistic urges rather than being about, you know what I mean? And a lot of video games are kind of that, right? But that being said, I don't know that means they should be heavily regulated or what that means. But again, when we talk about video games, we lead back to the more important thing to be worried about, which is social media, right?
Yeah.
And then the real risk, I think what you're saying is the real risk from video games is like way overblown compared to what it is, versus the risk from social media is something that is immense and poorly understood, even by people who are the designers of these platforms.
Yeah, and imminent, and not just imminent, but also like, it takes a lot less. It takes a lot less effort of observation to see the problems that social media creates compared to the problems that are created by video games. Man, speaking of social media, some crazy Twitter stuff happening. This whole rate limiting situation. So I'll tell you how I came across it, and then you tell me kind of if it matches your experience. I don't really go on Twitter that often. I go on Twitter every once in a while to look for a specific thing. Like, I'd be like, okay, I got to see if, the WoW servers are down, or I got to see if, whatever it is, like not so much WoW anymore, but like I got to go look for this specific thing, see if it's been tweeted about. But I don't scroll Twitter. I don't have it on my phone, kind of thing. So I didn't encounter any of this live, but I did see some content creators in my feed and like some random stuff here and there where it was like, people were like, Twitter is dying. Twitter is dying. Twitter is imploding. What's happening? And effectively, my impression of what happened is that kind of randomly, Elon Musk tweets like, okay, we're going to be rate limiting everybody on Twitter. So rate limiting means basically when you have a computer program that's running on the internet and people access it from other places, they usually use what's called an API, an application programming interface. And a rate limit is basically saying, okay, so each individual person from each individual IP address, we're going to limit the amount of times that they can talk to the API and get information from it. And each time your phone says, like, let me see a tweet, let me see the next page in my newsfeed, let me check my DMs, whatever it is, that is an API call. And so I'm a little bit fuzzy on the details of exactly which parts of the API were affected, but the tweet that Elon made was basically like, okay, so new unverified accounts can see 300 posts a day. Unverified accounts that aren't new can see 600, and then verified accounts with a blue check can see like 6,000 or something like that. And then throughout the day, it's like changing, it's fluctuating. He's making it higher, like doubling it or whatever. But people were very quickly running into this rate limit exceeded error, which is basically signifying that like they hit that point where the API is like, nah, you're good. Like, I'm not giving you any more Twitter. And the first thought I had in my head was like, thank you. Like, thank you for this. Thank you for your enforcing moderation of Twitter. This is amazing. Like, you're actually forcing people to go touch grass. Like,
it's like a drug dealer who like parcels out the heroin and like, don't want you having too much. I'm thinking about your safety.
Yeah. Or except for it's the drug dealer previously. By the way, drugs are bad. Let's just get that out of the way. YouTube, please don't get mad at us. But like, it's instead the dealer like gives you as much as you want for 10 years, and then all of a sudden he's like, you know what, I can't manage seeing you like this. Like, I have to cut you off a little bit.
Yeah, so you know what, at first I kind of had a question for you, because a lot of the way I saw it being reported on Twitter by Twitter users, because unlike you, I have a serious Twitter problem. And so I was hoping that I would run into this limiter, but I actually myself I never saw the limiter on my own. And I scroll through it a fair amount, you know what I mean? So I wonder if the whole numbers thing is bullshit. And I say that because I saw a lot of people saying like, oh, I got this thing. It keeps telling me like, and I don't know that they were scrolling a bunch. I think that maybe they were just getting like, it's just a generalized error message that's happening because there's some sort of failure in the communication between their device and the server or something like that, right? And somebody pulled out, you mentioned API, and I don't know much about it, but they were showing how like maybe it's the fact that Twitter is trying to refresh 20 times a second.
Oh yeah, I remember that thing you sent me.
Yeah. So I mean, you would know better than me. Are those potential answers as well? Like,
yeah, it could be. I mean, it could be a constellation of different things where somebody decides, probably Elon, somebody says like, yeah, let's go. This is a good idea. Let's go rate limit because I'm sick of, data scrapers or I'm sick of whatever. So they think that this is somehow a good idea and this is going to fix the problem, right? So somebody goes in and they fix the rate limiting issue. And then through fixing this, through enabling this rate limit, lowering that threshold dramatically, it could be the case that we find that there's bugs in the program that are causing immense amounts of redundant API calls that are now being hitting the limit, right? So it could be the case that the API was actually rate limited. They did actually modify the rate limiting settings. And then as a consequence of that, this bug that previously had no consequence is like, okay, you're getting rate limited. And why are you getting rate limited? Well, because there's this bug on the home screen that causes it to, under these circumstances, just DDoS itself, basically.
Okay. So it's almost both. Like the rate limit could have been a decision, an actual managerial decision that came in and resulted in the problem rather than it being some sort of like reactive sort of ad hoc bullshit explanation, which I wasn't quite saying, but I guess I was kind of implying too. I had never considered that's quite interesting that it may have been something that was sorry, I'm still trying to figure out what you told me, but yeah.
Well, I'll give you a great analogy for it. So imagine that you run like a grocery store, right? And you implement this new rule, and the new rule is like, okay, anybody who takes over 10 bags has to pay a surcharge, so you can start recouping the cost of these bags, right?
By the way, drugs are bad.
Yeah, bad bags, nice. So you add this surcharge, and then what you find out is that you have like 3 or 4 customers who every time they come, they get 300 bags for their 4 liter of milk and loaf of bread. And they were previously just taking them. And it's like, okay, that's bad. Like that's a problem that we didn't actually know about until we implemented this new limiting feature. So the analogy compared to the situation you're giving me is like, if this bug is legitimate, which is that the home screen is like, under certain circumstances, just pinging off like crazy. And previously, there's just no consequence to it. You just get your 300 grocery bags and just walk home, put them in the pile in the garage. But now it's like, oh, that's actually exposed. That issue is actually now exposed. So it
might have actually been an effectual, if not kind of ham-fisted and bad looking on the outside. But one of the things is, and I'm not defending Elon here, but really anything he does that have any implications are immediately used to impugn his managerial prowess because people are so negatively polarized with respect to him. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So, but it does seem like it was maybe a little ham-fisted. But what you're saying to me sounds like they may have actually exposed something that was weighing down the system that they were unaware of, and then now that they're aware of it, they can actually deal with it. So it might actually have a beneficial impact on the performance of the platform.
That could be the case, yeah, for that specific scenario.
Yeah, if that scenario is in fact.
Yeah, citation needed, I guess.
Yeah.
The thing about it for me is that like I question the validity of like rate limits are important. It's important to have rate limits. Anybody who tells you that an API should have no rate limit has no place touching a computer. Like at least not for anything more than like looking at cat pictures and checking their bank account balance. And even then, I don't know if I trust them with that. But anybody who is like, oh, just doesn't need a limit. Just let people get their data, as much data as they want. Blah blah blah. It's like, no, you need to have a limit for functional reasons, for logistical reasons that actually affect the performance of the site, right? So it's important. It has to happen. The thing that I question is like, it's so bizarre to have the limits be so aggressive when the Twitter product is the data. Like Yoel Roth, I read this article. Yoel Roth used to be like a higher up at Twitter. I don't remember his exact position, but he now works at or owns or operates something, Blue Sky, which is like a competitor to Twitter. And he was talking about this, and he said the important thing you have to remember is that the data belongs to the users and not to Twitter. So if the data is the product, which it is a large portion of the product, you need users to create that data. And so if you're enforcing a policy that has a negative effect on how much users use the platform and how much data they create, Reddit had a very similar problem recently where this was a few weeks ago, I think, where it was like Reddit announced, oh, we're going to start charging for our API access. Because previously it was like totally free. And there was a huge protest and like a bunch of subreddits like went private. It was this whole big thing. Part of the reason that it compares to the Twitter situation is that like if the subreddits go private as a result of the monetization of the API, that like the thing you're trying to make money on is not being made because of the way that you're trying to make money on it. So like if Twitter is making this decision where it's like, let's limit how much people can actually read and create posts in order to make more money off of the data created by people reading and creating posts. Like, do you see where I'm going with this? Like, it kind of doesn't really mesh. It seems kind of...
But you're right. It's like the rate limit appeared aggressive.
Yeah, it was very, very aggressive. I don't know what it ended up at, but like the first post I saw was like 300 posts a day for unverified. Even if you... unverified, new unverified. But even if you look at the case where it's somebody who doesn't pay for Twitter, but they're... So a sane person, I would say. So you look at the case where it's a person who's unverified, but they had their account for a long time. They get like 600 posts a day. You know, when you load your feed and it loads 50 tweets, like the program doesn't know or care if you actually read all 50 of those tweets. So if you scroll to the next page, like as soon as that page loads, bam, that's 50 out of 600 done. You go to the next page, bam, you're at 100. Like you're at 160 your daily total in seconds. So it's like I saw a bunch of people. Maybe we can get the screenshot on the screen if I can find it. But I took a screenshot of this guy who is doing this like really terrible math. He was like, oh well, actually, if the average tweet is this many words and the average person reads it this many words per minute, that means that this many tweets. And he was trying to do this math to justify like, oh, you would never read that many posts anyway. But it's like the API isn't checking to see that your eyes scrolled through and you collected the data in your brain. Like the API just cares that it served it to you. It's like going to an all-you-can-eat buffet, putting all the food in your plate, and then walking out without paying. Like, no. Like, it doesn't matter if you ate food or not. Like, you're here. You're being served. You pay for the fact that you got served. The API cares that it served you posts.
Well, and like you said before, it might not even care. In the example of a buffet, it knows like when you put food on your plate. But in this case, it might also just be throwing legs of chicken out every time you're looking at it.
Yeah,
being like, oh, just loading this up.
Counts. That counts. That counts. That's yours. Those are all yours.
And you have no idea what's going on because it's happening behind, behind the curtain, right?
Yeah. Or it's like every dish you look at in the buffet is like whether you take some of the potato salad or not, that counts. That's one of your 600 dishes you're allowed to look at today. Like that's a better way of enforcing that analogy, I'd say. But yeah, it's jank.
And now a word from one of our many sponsors.
Unstickable tape, safe for walls and completely useless. Brought to you by 4M. 4M.
'Cause Johnson & Johnson ain't shit.
Well, and it kind of comes back to the question about, because especially looking at the wide difference between the verified and the unverified, which I feel like was extremely arbitrary and extremely, like, that's the big differential. Forget the 300 to 600.
Well, it's a 10x.
Yeah. Like it's wild. And so it speaks again to a point that I've made a couple of times, and I spoke about on my Substack about how these decisions, I think that many of them could be understood better through a political lens rather than a strict business lens, right? Because that right there is almost intended to alienate people who aren't willing to pay for a blue check.
Yeah.
Right. And to reward people who are a member of, Elon's $8 a month club. Right.
Yeah.
And, I've made points about the impact on the discursive environment on Twitter of the emergence of the blue check, and how I think that is actually a pretty calculated, relatively calculated move, if not calculated, functionally effective to that end, to kind of shape the discourse towards more reactionary voices and voices that are aligned with who Elon Musk apparently is aligning himself with. It seems like you could kind of chalk this up as another one, even if it's only sort of obliquely so, like in the form of like the rate limit was just a decision, but then there is the arbitrary decision. The blue check guys, give them 10x, because who gives a shit, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that there's still also an argument to be made there, probably technologically, where you say, well, somebody who's paying $8 a month, likely Google doesn't have 10,000 $8 a month accounts that it's using to scrape Twitter.
Yeah.
But it might have 1,000 free ones. So there might be something to be said about that, right? I still don't know enough about what scraping means, and I find the whole idea like
They're scraping our data. Well, it's that's the other thing about this, is that data scraping is a real thing that happens. There's no questioning that this is real, that this is, I think even Yoel Roth said in that article, he's like, it was like the unspoken secret or something like that, or like the unwritten rule that like the data is like the thing, like the data is being scraped. It's a thing, right? So it's definitely happening that places like Reddit, Twitter, maybe even Facebook, that these places have APIs, and those APIs are being used to pull in vast amounts of data, and then that data is being used to create other products or to serve other services. Perfect example. I don't know how often you go on YouTube Shorts, but every once in a while there'll be one of these YouTube Shorts that's like, in the background, it's like some guy playing Minecraft or like GTA or something, like doing like a jumping puzzle in Minecraft, and then it's this like AI generated voice reading a Reddit post, and it'll be like, "Am I the asshole? Male, 30 years old. I and my female, 35." And it's like this AI voice reading. It's literally just reading a Reddit post and reading the top like 10 comments on it, and that's like a 45-second video.
Or a 45-minute video.
Yeah, or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, but like that's almost certainly an AI generated video based on data scraped from the Reddit API. Almost certainly. I would be shocked if it was not the case.
God, you could just churn that shit out.
Oh yeah, you just set it and forget it. It's like an infomercial. Like it literally is just like you set this program up. I don't know if you saw a while ago, maybe the last couple of months, there was this thing on Twitch. It was like some like AI generated like Seinfeld parody. Did you hear about this?
Yes, I saw
it. Was so funny. So it's like this AI that basically is using I think GPT-3 to create scenes from a fake Seinfeld show. And then there was another program that was basically like some type of 3D animation program that was written to kind of coordinate with the scripts that are being generated through GPT, such that the scripts that were generated would have lines associated with people, and those people would be models in the display. So it would be like some really janky like 3D like Seinfeld model where he's like walking in and he reads a line, and then like Elaine comes in and she reads the line. It's like, and it was all procedurally not procedurally generated, but it was all AI generated. That's the kind of stuff that I think they're hoping to not leave the bag on the table for. You know what I mean? Like probably Elon looks at stuff like that and is like not the Seinfeld one, but like he looks at stuff that's like scraping data out of Twitter to do stuff like that, and he's like, what the hell? Like this is free money. Like it's free real estate. What's going on?
And didn't the Seinfeld one, didn't it devolve into like some transphobic like rant or something?
It went off the rails.
So I don't want to leave it completely I think that there's the chance that Elon Musk did look at the Seinfeld thing. Yeah, you know what? I can get behind something like this.
Yeah, true. Yeah, so I just want to make it clear that like that stuff is real. It does happen. Now, whether or not it has a sizable impact on the performance of these platforms, I'm a lot more doubtful of that. I'm a lot more doubtful. Because one thing about rate limiting is rate limiting traditionally is not meant to be used for like the way that Twitter's using it. So what rate limiting was originally designed to do, and the purpose that it normally serves, is to maintain performance on a server. So if I have this API and I have this data about the weather, let's say, and I want everybody to be able to access that API and get stuff from it, I don't want 1 or 2 or 10 bad actors to be able to come in and barrel through this API 100 times a second until it reaches the point where I don't have the server hardware to be able to process all of these requests at the rate they're coming in. And so the site effectively goes down. It's like, you ever heard of the Reddit hug of death? Where it's like sometimes there'll be a post on Reddit about this like really niche website that gets really popular. And then so many people go on this Reddit post and then go to the website that they're effectively DDoSing this website. But not as a bad thing, but because everyone wants to see it. That's why it's the hug of death, not like, just DDoSing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But so normally rate limiting is meant to be like, all right, everybody, like one at a time, like, don't get your seconds until everyone has had first at the family dinner. Like that's what it's meant to do. But the way that it seems like it's being used for Twitter is like, it's tier based. It's like, you pay us more money or show us that your data's worth more, and we'll ease up on your rate limiting, which is kind of crazy. Like I don't know. I've seen that before with certain APIs that I've accessed where there's like a free tier and a paid tier.
But this isn't even the API. This is just general user.
Yeah, this is just the app. And the other thing I'm not sure of too is that I don't want to get too deep into the technical details because half the audience will probably fall asleep halfway through. But like the other weird thing about this API is like, I don't know which parts of this API rate limiting affect, like, is this like affecting people who use Twitter through a third-party app only? Is this affecting people who use the Twitter mobile app? Does that work differently? Does it communicate not through the same API endpoint? Is it like, there's a lot of technical behind-the-scenes stuff that's not exposed to us that makes me question certain things.
Well, and you brought up a point that made me kind of think of the fact that wouldn't this limit the capacity? Because if there's all these people that are scraping data in order to build products that utilize this data in some way, to some extent that must include these sort of downstream like there's almost a downstream economy from these very large platforms because they produce such massive reams of data and make them available to smaller third-party developers. And then those people can go and they can build products that I would imagine sometimes can integrate well with, like, for example, you might have like something like a Chrome,
like an extension
for Twitter or something like that, that they got data from Twitter's thing and blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of what's powering it. I, again, don't know the technical details, but it seems like there's a whole downstream economy that you're kind of limiting and kneecapping by engaging in this sort of just being like, we don't want people to have access whatsoever. There should be no scraping. Scraping's bad, making this black and white thing. And so I see that, like, and just generally, it just seems anti-innovation. And it makes me think about the fact that, one of the big things about Tesla was that Musk was making all of the schematics, apparently. I don't know how true this was, but this was a big marketing thing, was that we're making all of this information publicly known so that our competitors can build electric cars. We want everyone to build electric cars, save the world, et cetera, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, wow, that's a great thing. So it's interesting that he appears to be taking such a polar opposite approach when it comes to Twitter, when he's saying, no, we want to keep all of our data to ourselves and parcel it out as we see it. And it's kind of like we're putting up barriers rather than creating greater degrees of transparency. And so that, plus especially what appears to me to be the kneecapping of a downstream economy, again, leads me to think that these decisions can't strictly be understood through a business logic sort of framework. And that you need to kind of look at it like, what is the political and social and informational sort of purpose of the purchase of Twitter and these various managerial decisions.
Well, he's also done stuff before where it's like a while back, it was this huge public thing that he was like, Twitter's algorithm is going to be open source. We're going to open source the algorithm so everybody knows what the algorithm does. No secrets. We're going to make it open source. Open source. He said that all the time. And it's like, I looked at this open source code, and the problem is there was algorithms that were like trained, like machine learning algorithms, that were trained to do certain things, and the training data and the mechanism of training was not revealed to us. Just the code so like the real life analogy is, imagine that I run a pizza shop, okay? And I make these phenomenal pizzas that nobody else can reproduce. They're amazing pizzas. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to show the world. I'm going to show the world how we make our pizzas. I'm going to explain. It's going to be open source pizza recipes. Everybody's going to know. And then I bring the news crew into the back room, and we get a pizza order, and it's a piece of paper, and a guy takes the piece of paper and he looks at it, and he walks into a back room, and he walks back out with a pizza, and he puts it on the table, and he's like, there you go, everybody. Open source pizza recipe. It's like, wait, no. Hang on. What's that guy doing? Like, what did he do? It's like, you didn't tell me what's happening in that room. Like, I need to know that. This isn't open source. You just walked me through one door. That's basically the equivalent of the code that I saw. Now, it could be the case that there was a lot more code that was revealed that I didn't see. I don't think that's the case, but I'm happy to be proven wrong. Let us know in the comments below. But yeah, it was just like, it was one of these infuriating situations where it's like, he does this a lot, where Elon Musk will purport himself to be this technologically wizened person. Where sometimes he is. Like, sometimes he knows his shit and he knows exactly what he's talking about. But sometimes he'll say stuff like we need to rewrite the stack, the Twitter stack. And if you're a computer engineer who is not gargling on Elon full time, you know that when somebody says rewrite the stack, the hair on the back of your neck stands up. That's like if you're a mechanic and somebody comes in and says, like, we need a new engine and transmission and brakes, and it's like somebody coming in and like telling you, like, okay, that was a great 50-page essay that you wrote. You need to write it all over again because it's bad. It's like, so instead of editorializing and finding the chapters where it's like, this doesn't make sense, this idea needs to be fleshed out a bit more, there's a bit of contradiction here, it's like, just rewrite it. Just rewrite the stack.
Well, yeah, or it's like, or I think maybe I really liked your mechanic approach, where it's kind of like he's bringing to the mechanic a job that's meant for the factory that builds the thing at the start.
Yeah.
He's saying in the middle, let's just rebuild the wheel in the middle of the process, right? And it's kind of like taking the essay and saying, okay, but all of these underlying assumptions that we just take for granted in your essay, prove these things. Don't take these, like, things that are like tried and true, elements of thought. You know what I mean? Just remake that from the beginning. It's like, okay, so now I have to I can't just write an essay now. I have to define words and
it's, yeah, the term stack, the way I like to explain it is if you imagine like a stack of boxes, right? And so like the box at the bottom might be like the database, and the box above that might be like the server, one of the servers, and there's like a, user interface box and like all this kind of stuff, right? Payment processing box, whatever. And so the stack is the program represented as all these boxes stacked on top of each other, or maybe it's like a pyramid shape, maybe it's, whatever, right? And so when somebody says rewrite the stack, we're taking all of those boxes, knocking them down, opening every one up, changing it, closing it, and putting it all back together. Instead of saying these are the problems with the payment processing box, let's take that box out for a sec and fix it and put it back where it belongs. Or let's take this one box and fix it. It's saying knock down the stack of boxes. That's what someone who says rewrite the stack, that's what they're saying. And it's when you hear it explained like that, it doesn't take a computer science, like it doesn't take a programming engineer, software engineer to know that is an unhinged take to have.
Well, you know what? But I almost feel like when I hear that, taking my other perspective to it, because it's in a way it's sort of this hyperbolic speech, right? Where it's like, we got to rewrite the stack. But in a way it sounds to me, again, utilizing my theory of this institutional transformation he's engaging in, it sounds like what he's saying is I'm taking a torch to everything that existed beforehand. That's what we're doing. Like even though he's saying it in technical jargon that's making him sound kind of stupid, because anybody that actually understands the technical jargon is going like, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It's not. It's perhaps more. It's language to evoke an idea rather than language to actually deliver meaning. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it just sucks so much. Like, it's just like hearing somebody talk about something where it's like, oh, you know what? That reminds me. I was going to say that in that Yoel Roth article, he used a phrase. He used a phrase that I love. It's oh man, it's so good. He said he was talking about this rate limiting thing and how Elon's claiming that, or people are claiming that it has to do with like they're doing it just for data scraping and not that it was an accident or that there was a technical error or something like that. And the words he used was, he said, it doesn't pass the sniff test. And so in the context of that, he means like, you know, you got some leftovers in the fridge. You take it out of the fridge, you crack the container and just like give it a little whiff and tell me if you think it's still good to eat or not. And if it doesn't pass the sniff test, you throw that shit out. And so he's saying that like, this whole situation just smells kind of funky.
Stinks.
Yeah, it just stinks a little bit. It's like a little bit of expired yogurt. Like I think I want to throw this out. I don't trust this situation. And I love that saying so much because, number one, the idea of a sniff test for food in your fridge, I would imagine, or at least I would hope, that the majority of people are going to smell rotten food and throw it out, right? We all agree, like, on for the most part, if something has gone bad or not, right? With this Twitter situation, it's a sniff test that has like, there's like qualifications. there's like an skill and experience factor to this sniff test. Like if the average person smells it, they might be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Data scraping, you know, yeah, makes sense. Yeah. But when somebody who's involved in the industry or somebody who is like involved in the technology, they do the sniff test and they're like, I don't know, actually. Like he's the sommelier who's like, he has the glass of wine. He's like, yeah, so very nice. So 50-year vintage red wine. I don't know what accent that is, but it just happened. So deal with it. He's the sommelier. And I'm the guy who's like, oh, I think that's kokanee in that glass. Like that smells like a Pabst Blue Ribbon. Like the difference is night and day. Right?
This is some of that Dylan Mulvaney beer.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting.
I have to ask, is that one of the first times that you've actually encountered that phraseology, sniff test?
In that context, I think I've heard it before in other contexts, but in this context, it made me think really hard. Not really. It made me think about the perspective difference, like the perspective that somebody. I don't know a lot about Yoel Roth other than his, like that he's worked in the industry and he's like running another company that is basically Twitter. And so he has a different perspective on this compared to just some random person or somebody who has a little bit of computer science experience or a little bit of networking experience or whatever, right? But it just made me think, yeah, that this is like a sniff test, but it's like different for everybody. It's more of I like the wine example. Like it's more of a sniff test for like a glass of wine, where it's like some wine mom with like two kids is gonna be like, yeah, that's red, that's white, like. But like a sommelier.
Let me see the box.
Yeah, the box. Yeah, exactly. True. Yeah. So yeah, no, I've heard it before, but in this context,
it's interesting. I only ask because it's pretty common in discussions around politics, actually, right? Okay. And it's interesting. I never considered that extra element. I really liked it paints a picture talking about the sommelier. But, you know, especially when, say, there's something with regards to, say, the Supreme Court stuff that's been going on, you get a lawyer on who says, well, here, let's look at this. Doesn't pass the sniff test. These arguments don't pass the sniff.
Yeah.
You hear that sort of phraseology you watch Meet the Press long enough, you're going to hear Chuck Todd say sniff test about 100 times. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you appreciate that phrase. But yeah, you know, it's interesting. You bring up Blue Sky. I think that's actually Jack Dorsey's, or Jack Dorsey. I don't know how to pronounce that. He's the former
Dorsey. I think it's Dorsey.
Dorsey, yeah, the former CEO of Twitter.
Yep.
That's his new product. So it seems like his old team just went and made we're going to make a clone of Twitter.
Pretty much, yeah.
And, you know, I would be tempted to go to it, but I have no reason to like Jack Dorsey's public utterances since selling Twitter and being just kind of a more private citizen have not led me to be any more sympathetic to him than I am to Elon Musk, frankly. So
Yeah.
I have no reason to go use Blue Sky unless for some reason I guess. Granted, I should probably not attach the personality of the CEO to the product I should use. I should be the overall culture around it. But it's really the culture of Twitter and the developing culture of Twitter that, although has always had a problematic edge to it, that problematic edge is now being, is the center of it.
The thing that bothers me about Twitter, and this is such a thorn in my side. This is such a grudge that I have about Twitter. Like, it's like a chip on my shoulder where it's like, this is the only not just social media platform. This is the only like digital product that I know of that uses technical debt as a selling point. So what I mean by that, technical debt is like, let's say if you design a cell phone in the year 2000 and it doesn't have Bluetooth in it, and then like 10 years later you're using the same design and people can't use Bluetooth, like that could be a sign of technical debt where it's like you have to replace something, fix something so that it's like more modernized, it works better in with the new context of the product, right? So when Twitter first came around, it was a text-based service. Like I remember I had that janky ass Nokia flip phone where like the keyboard slides out, right? Felt like a super spy, just like clicking out your keyboard and texting tweets to like a short code, like a Twitter, a 5-digit, 6-digit, whatever number for Twitter, sending tweets from my cell number, and those tweets would go onto my Twitter feed. Like I would tweet them via text. And SMS messages back then, we didn't use Messenger, or like we had BlackBerry Messenger. You had certain things. We didn't have iMessage. We didn't have, or maybe we did. I don't know. I can't recall. But the vast majority of communication was through SMS. Mm-hmm. And SMS had a 160 character limit. And so Twitter, in order to function within this restriction, had a 140 character limit, allowing 20 characters for commands and usernames and stuff like that, like just extra stuff, right? So the whole concept of Twitter having these short burst messages, these short little messages that go out, it was built around this restriction, this SMS restriction, and it was that way for like years. Like I think they increased it in like 2017, like well after it first came around. And so now the whole selling point of Twitter that separates Twitter from, let's say, Facebook or Instagram is that its whole identity is built around this restriction of like short messages. And I can't think of any other product that basically takes this thing that was a technical limitation and turns it into like a feature. It's like the class. This is I don't know how well known this is outside of like programmer circles or like gamer circles, but like there's this saying that's like, it's not a bug, it's a feature. So it's like, oh, it's not a bug that you can't tweet more than 280 characters. It's actually a feature. It's intentional. We did it that way on purpose. It's like, okay, like, all right. It's
kind of like, imagine if there was a YouTube like video service, but at the end of a video, if you wanted to rewatch it, you had to like press a rewind button, like it was an old VHS, and watch the whole thing going. Yeah. And this cool, the old VHS styles.
Yeah, it's so stupid. But you look at something like Facebook. Like I remember, I get, everybody gets those cringe Facebook memories from 12 years ago or whatever, where it's like, you put some cringy face.
All my Facebook memories are completely based.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, totally based. Yeah, I look at some of them where it's like it used to be the case that your Facebook status would always be like right after your name. So a lot of the statuses would be like, "Is having a good day." Well, okay, that's like a pretty cringe one, but like
they were all cringe. No,
they were all cringe. That is true. It's like is something or had something. There's always like I forget the name of that part of speech, but like one of those words. And then something after it. So you look at a status from like 12 years ago, and it's like, it's this in this weird way. But then a couple of years after that, they realize, okay, this is stupid. Like we shouldn't force everyone's status to start with their name. Like what if they just don't want to put, like what if they just want to put a status that doesn't start with their name? Maybe, maybe we try that. Who knows? And so they got rid of it. And a lot of stuff in Facebook changed in this way, like how you post to places, there, how the wall works, which is now like your timeline, all this kind of stuff where it was like parts of it were limited technologically and they just changed them over time. But Twitter is like the only platform I can think of where it's like
in its original form, basically.
It's pretty close. And so Elon's doing this thing where, and I haven't decided if it's a good or bad idea, like if I like it or don't like it, but he's doing this thing where a lot of the parts of Twitter that are like antiquated technical debt things where it's like, it just sucks because it's always been this way. Like not being able to post long form videos, not being able to post tweets over a certain length without, I think, a third party. Like there's TwitLonger. It's like that third party application where it's like you write a huge ass tweet and then you just get like a link to it and you just put it in your tweet and people just click on that and they read the full thing. But like he's all of these things where it's like, you know, allowing new functionality. He's like paywalling it all. So it's like, oh, well, you can tweet more than the 280 characters from 6 years ago if you pay $8 a month. And, oh, you can actually, you can post like these super long videos that are like an hour long if you pay $8 a month. And he's like taking all these features. So he is changing the platform in some sense, but he's paywalling everything. And so I don't know how I feel about that yet. Like in terms of a business decision, it probably makes sense. Probably is a good idea. Maybe. I don't know.
I don't think it makes much sense as a business decision at all. But I think there's a certain brilliance to it outside of the business sense. I mean, I've made this point a couple of times, but he's cutting the chaff. He's disrupting previous discursive communities that exist there that he wants to disrupt, and he's entrenching new ones that he wants to entrench, right? And I mean, if you look at who's getting the blue checks, and the blue checks determine who rises to the top of comments under tweets. So anybody tweets something and there's a lot of comments underneath, the top comments you're going to see are going to be people with blue checks and have like 100 followers rather than actual like legitimate old time checks, like the actual verified accounts and stuff like that, which would originally be. So you'll get some like really weird stuff right at the top. Like the cream does not float to the top. But if you take the perspective that there's a reason that Elon Musk thinks these things are the cream or will create the cream and will be what rises to the top, it makes sense. You know what I mean? And so there are certain discursive communities that seem to be growing in intensity and growing in the number of followers as a result of the changes. So I really don't know that it can be understood on a business basis. I think if we think about it along those lines, we misinterpret the basis of it. I think the decisions that are being made at Twitter demonstrate that it's not a business decision, not a business-based thing. And as expensive as it might seem, it was financed by other people. Who knows what their opinions are, but it seems like more of an influence campaign to me, a political and social influence campaign, and a really efficacious and really like in terms of like he's taken over an entire platform and can do what he wishes with it. And he's not bound by money or business logic. He isn't. He can subsidize. He's the richest man on the planet. He can burn $50 billion. Right? Especially when like 4/5 of that money is like Saudi money that's being laundered anyways and is being given to him so that, you know, like Saudi state posts will get to the top. Like it's an instrument for authoritarian regimes. Like I'm sure he's working with them to some extent. You know what I mean? Whatever that looks like, I have no idea. But they're not looking. Saudi Arabia, like Elon Musk, is not doing it as a business thing. They don't need the business. They've got plenty of money. Yeah. It's about influence. Yeah. Right? That's where the power is derived.
Yeah.
So even with the rate limiting stuff, if we think about a business sense, there might be some technical explanation for it, but it seems like there's also a lot of contradictions in the technical explanations for it. But if we think about it just as this sort of institutional overhaul and institutional transformation, right? And think about what is the institution of Twitter? It is the discursive communities that exist within it. That is the whole point of Twitter. That is what is being sold on Twitter, is a discursive community, right? And he's disrupting and changing that discursive community into his own image. And he's doing it pretty effectively.
Yeah.
And now, a word from one of our many sponsors.
Toiletos, the cereal your kids are going to hate. For best results, pour directly in the toilet. Toiletos, for the undiscerning customer.
Warning, Toiletos is 13% asbestos by weight. Saturate box upon purchase to reduce risk of mesothelioma. 4M brands are not responsible for the quality or reliability of any of their products. Consult a psychiatrist if you consider buying this product at any time.
brought to you by 4M. 4M.
Because General Mills tastes like shit.
How did you first see this person? This I think her name on H. Pearl Davis.
Just pearly things. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen I introduced you to Destiny. We talked about that a while back. I think a lot of these red pill people I encountered through Destiny, like through him interviewing them, going on their shows, whatever. And that's probably how I found out about her is like Destiny was probably memeing on her or something, or like went on a show with her or something like that. It's, oh boy, it's a can of worms, dude. It's, the red pill stuff is really wild. It's like, once you start, it's a rabbit hole. Like once you start looking into it a little bit, it's like, man, I'm like at a loss for words. Like, what was the thing that you encountered that?
Well, in this case, it was a post. It was actually a shared post, and I'd seen her a couple of places before this, but this thing kind of popped up recently. Somebody I follow on Twitter shared it and says, I'll just read the tweet. It says, generally not a fan of accusing people of being hateful towards their own demographic, but what a vile misogynistic piece of garbage. Now, this is referring to H. Pearl Davis. And basically she has this status where she says, she's basically saying, I'm going to have to make a whiteboard presentation on why women are uglier in their 30s than in their 20s because some of you are so dumb. And it's one of these things where it's like, the first thing... Imagine thinking that that's a meaningful discourse to have. What is the purpose of that discourse, if not simply to inflame? It's to inflame and enrage women and women's allies and people and just normal people, frankly. I'm women's allies, but I like to think that beyond that, I'm just a normal human being here. That I'm like the same reaction. What kind of vile misogynistic garbage? What does that even mean? Like, what are the premises of that, right? But and then it's also like one of the things that I saw, and then I'm like just kind of scrolling through, were like, who are the kind of people that were reacting positively to these people, to this? And they're all kind of like in this demographic of like middle-aged, kind of looking kind of like they have kind of conspiratorial tendencies. A lot of them are like, these are also, a lot of these people are blue checks, but they're like blue checks again that have like 176 followers, stuff like that. And one of them was like this guy who was like, he's this guy from like Western Canada, like this middle-aged guy. And he was like, I went through his page. I was just like curious. I'm like, what is with these people? Like, who is attracted to this kind of stuff, right? And this guy was just like saying misogynist, but he was like a real guy. It wasn't a troll account. Like, it's like literally I saw a picture where he's like, nice day for a hot air balloon ride. Like, it's obviously like this, I don't mean to be rude, but this dorky ass guy's fucking Twitter. You know what I mean? And he was like this one thing where he was like, some woman commented on something and like, he retweeted his own comment under her comment being like, I wonder if this chick's got an OnlyFans account, or something like that. Like it's just this massive greed. Yeah, it's kind of similar. It's like, even like, where is the relevance? What does that even mean? Why is that something you jump to, right? And it's going back to this whole red pill thing. One of the first places I saw this, maybe not the first places, but one of the places where it really came to mind and was quite telling to me was that Jordan Peterson shared one of this pearly things. That sounds derisive. One of this pearly things, but one of her tweets, he retweeted it, and his daughter commented on her, and her daughter's, ensconced in the same, discursive community, for lack of a better term. And she was like, Dad, this is like, she literally said, this is some like red pill misogynistic garbage. Like, yeah, like this is not stuff you should be sharing, not stuff you should be giving a platform to, which, I don't know much about her, but good on her that she would say that, and especially because she's in that space where there could be costs to her saying that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there were. I'm positive there were.
Exactly. And so it's just this broad, hyper misogynistic space. Yeah, it's weird, man. It's weird, and it's so. And I feel like it's kind of one of these things where often it's like I see a couple of these woman red pillars who tell you the truths about women. Like there's this one that I've seen on Facebook video. Facebook video is always trying to recommend all sorts of red pill stuff to me.
Yeah.
And there's one, her name was Jedediah Bila or something like that.
Okay.
And she had a similar sort of thing about like, women's body counts and blah, 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 blah. Right. And it's like, it's just pablum for lonely men who are just, like it's pablum, and
what is pablum? Sorry.
Pablum is a thing that you feed a child. It's bland. And it's just like, it's like.
Oh, I should probably know this.
Yeah.
Being a new father.
Yeah, I was thinking
should
of
probably know what this is. Okay.
But yeah, it's like,
I was asking for the audience, obviously.
Yes, no, of course.
All of the, yeah.
Of course. I don't have like a really good explanation, but it's basically
gruel.
Yeah, it's gruel. It's red meat, It's like they eat it up. It's made for them, you know what I mean? It's for a very particular crowd, you know what I mean? You or I put it in our mouth and this is disgusting garbage, right? But there's a demographic for it, grown ass babies, I guess. But it's scary to see how like, I see how people get negatively polarized on one thing or another. Like I could see how somebody who's like generally normal but has some weird views, say on women, like like there's we live in a culture of misogyny, and and there's also a lot of lonely people. So somebody has a couple of weird ideas in there, so they're kind of attracted to this thing of being like, yeah, you know what, maybe there's something to do with society, and maybe women are part of the problem, and blah blah blah, and it's kind of attractive sort of language, and they creep into this space where suddenly they're like highly radicalized, politically red-pilled people across the board because of this one fringe issue that, for whatever reason they were susceptible to, Well,
that's part of the thing with Andrew Tate too, is that and all these red pill creators, is that I do think that there is a large sect of young men who are neglected in society. They don't have people to speak to them. They don't have people to uplift them, to help them grow and change and become better members of society. I think there is a huge sect of young men that fall into that category where they don't have role models. They don't have, they're demonized in some sense. Like there is something about their existence that culturally that needs to change, that needs to be improved upon. But I don't see, when I look at these red pill content creators, I see grifters. I don't see people I don't see an honest, true effort to uplift people and to, add to the world. Like it's always a subtractive thing. It's always like, don't date these kinds of women, or, don't don't, what's the thing about like sugars or whatever? It's like they're trying to keep you down. They're trying to lower your testosterone by feeding you sugar. It's like, okay, what? It's always subtractive. It's always like, it rarely is it like an additive thing where it's like, it doesn't feel beneficial to me. It doesn't feel like it's like really having a net positive result. So I see that there is a real issue here. Like there is a real group of people who is not being addressed. They're not being attended to. But this is not the way to do it. Like this is not
Well, it's the way to do it if you want to successfully sell a product and also
if you want to make some bank, it's the way to do it.
Or, foster neo-fascistic views, or there's any number of reasons bad actors would be involved.
Go to jail in Romania.
Whatever you're looking to
do.
The world's your oyster. But, part of it too, and this isn't to completely dismiss this alienation, but I want to say two things. Firstly, I think, and this is where we're seeing the real danger, is that is probably the biggest cohort, but there's other people who apparently are at risk to being red-pilled, for lack of a better term, who have other fringe issues. But this is a big one, and it's among young men, and I can't help but think it's sort of actually a form of relativistic suffering. And what I mean by that is so much of our lives are facilitated through electronic media. Whether it be social media or playing video games, where we get different understandings of reality, right? We see so much, kind of when we talk about people show on Instagram their vacations and their good times and not them arguing with their partner or them eating an unsatisfactory meal, right?
Everyone posts their A pluses, not their C minuses.
Exactly. So always, yes, exactly. So always see our A pluses around us. So on a relativistic level, psychologically, we're living an actual normal life where it's like, we don't always smell like flowers. Sometimes we take a shit. You know what I mean? We live in the real world, but I just took something some people do. That he's actually talking about the old things on Facebook. Aaron Kramer just went and took a nice dump was probably what I put back in
Those
the
are
day.
people who get rate limited. Okay.
Yeah.
That's who the rate limit's actually for. Yeah. You need to go touch some grass.
Yeah. But you see what I mean? So there's a thing, and it's actually a concept that I hadn't heard of before, but I find very interesting, and I think it'd be interesting thing for me to end on. Is called the de Tocqueville's paradox. So de Tocqueville was this political philosopher from like the late 18th, early 19th century, and basically the idea of the de Tocqueville paradox is as social conditions improve, the capacity for social grievance actually amplifies rather than diminishes, and it's sort of like this relativistic issue. So that's kind of what I see.
So like the better life gets on average, the easier it is to complain. Is that kind of the idea?
Basically, yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
And so I really do see an element of that. Like it's we're being fed things that, messages in media that like, feed vulnerable narcissistic tendencies that we all have, right? Where it's like, I deserve this thing. The senses of entitlement, and senses of entitlement rooted in the fact that these are normal things, like, I'm Sheila Buff from Transformers and I should date Megan, whatever her name was, right? Mr. Normal Guy should get this, that, and the other thing. Mr. Normal and not to say that Mr. Normal Guy shouldn't get something, but none of us are entitled to anything, actually. You know what I mean? These are, we should seek the things we want, but we can't operate from a basis of entitlement. And so I can't help but see a degree to which, and it doesn't sell well, but a lot of grievance is actually just rooted in problems with the aggrieved. Sometimes that's the case. And that's not to say, let's blame individuals for it. There's systemic issues. Mm-hmm. There's something about the structure of our media environment that is leading to this sort of thing.
Yeah, there's a lack of humility too. Like we talk about that a lot where one of our principles is like, practice epistemic humility, which is like being humble about what you know and what you don't know. But it's also just like there's just a general sense of humility that I think probably is lacking in some places where it really shouldn't be. Well, I think that's a good place for us to cut it off. This has been a great discussion. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, critiques, or citations that we desperately needed, please leave them in the comments below. We are very grateful to have had you, and we will see you on the next one. Adios.
Welcome to the fucking podcast.